Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 11 preview, and we're going to be looking ahead towards a week where unfortunately fixtures aren't perfect for our FPL teams. But I think the most important topic to illustrate right now is you need to accept that because we've invested into these Newcastle picks, into these Arsenal picks who are facing each other, or even let's say Chelsea and even Tottenham, that it's okay to have a team that looks a little bit bad on paper this week, because the whole point is all of these picks still have good fixtures ahead, maybe with exception to Newcastle and Spurs who have slightly worse fixtures. Obviously with Chelsea, they just simply have bad fixtures until let's say game week 14/16. So don't worry too much about them. They're probably going to be bench players for you. However, what I would say as well is even, for example, within teams like Brighton and West Ham, they have away fixtures, so try to temper your expectations as well. But the key thing is all of these players in general have really good fixtures in Game Week 12, so don't jump the gun on transferring out some of these players, especially if you want to keep them for Game Week 12. That's my first piece of advice that I would give. Now let's actually head on towards the video. I will be talking about all the positional transfers this week and the key picks that I would go for this week. And alternatively, of course, as I said, because of what I've prefaced in the opening section of the video, do consider seriously rolling this week or maybe ignoring some of the transfers. You don't need to capture all the short-term upside if your picks are really good for the medium to long term. And that's just what I have to say in the opening preamble. If you guys haven't done so already, I would really appreciate you subscribing and also liking the video. It really helps with supporting the channel and its growth. A lot of people who watch the video aren't subscribed, so I would love to get the subscriber number ups to get to 20K at the end of the next month, which is November. So that's going to be the opening bit of the video. Let's move on to the positional transfers. In the defensive positions this week, I do think that actually while City have a great fixture, it's not advisable to jump onto a City asset, right? I wouldn't be going into Walker now. I probably wouldn't be going into Guardiola. At this time, I think the only priority transfer within the defender position truly is Tsimikas. Tsimikas is most likely going to price rise. I'm recording this video at around midnight time after the fixtures were played, where Liverpool had gotten a clean sheet versus Nottingham Forest. We saw him actually play in that fixture, play almost 90 minutes, and of course that's fantastic, right? Because in the previous week we were a little bit concerned about that 61-minute substitution, which was a very weird scenario. They're now looking ahead towards a EFL Cup game. I think they'll actually play the academy left back in terms of Chambers in that fixture, and going forwards probably for the next game, which is going to be Luton away, I think Tsimikas will probably come back to the team and start. So I do think Tsimikas is the priority transfer this week. Outside of Tsimikas though, I think you can also be looking at maybe someone like Guehi this week, or maybe even Maguire. It really just depends on what your appetite is for Man United. The simple reality is this Man United team have been shocking. They're so shocking, in fact, that from an underlying point of view, you could talk about the eye test and what you like. They've been horrible there. But from an analytics point of view, really, they've been one of the bottom half defenses, and very clearly bottom half defenses. So when you compare and contrast, let's say a team like Chelsea that of course lost again on the weekend as well, Man United are firmly within that bottom half in terms of expected goals conceded, and that's a complete gulf from a team like Chelsea. So that's a little bit of perspective for you. And you could invest into either Maguire or Dalot, but I do think expending that much money on Dalot feels odd, right? We know Aaron Wan-Bissaka is around the corner. He's going to be close to fitness. We know there's an international break in Game Week 13. So how much confidence do you really have in Dalot keeping that spot? And the same sort of goes with Maguire as well. Lindelof and Varane could be the pairing on any day. We know Evans can come into the team. But it was a very shocking team that came out. They played horrifically again, conceded almost 5 expected goals, which is ludicrous, versus a City team that this season have been rather toothless in attack. So yes, of course, United are awful. I would generally consider Maguire at his price point, because at 4.2, I can't make those comparisons to, let's say, I don't know, a team like Crystal Palace or even West Ham, who are probably also not exactly picks that you would love. I think Guehi, from the point of view that he has a great defense, but of course doesn't really have that much avenues to attacking returns compared to, let's say, his peer in Anderson, who at least has a great ball in his corner, which obviously he got the assist for Ayew, or even comparing to, let's say, Agurd, another bottom half defense in West Ham is probably the comparison. So of course Maguire at 4.2 with good fixtures ahead still, after the City game has now culminated, then of course Maguire is probably the only pick that I would seriously consider with this United team. But the question I would ask yourself is actually, if you own Taylor and Taylor's ready to play this weekend, why not just seriously consider playing Taylor for 1 week? It's not a good fixture per se, because obviously this Burnley defense, I mean, they're also something else when it comes to the quality of the defense respective to the rest of the league, but also just general expectations. We're not really expecting clean sheets from this team. But that's what I would say. Because this week is so poor, because maybe you don't want to actually spend a free transfer towards owning United assets, it is generally a week where you should consider rolling your free transfer. And especially if you, let's say, have Udogie in your team, I would also generally consider maybe, why not actually just keep your doggy, because he could actually be fit and he could be ready for this Chelsea fixture, which would be a very good fixture in my opinion, just because Chelsea are a little bit toothless in attack as well, particularly from the finishing point of view. And alternatively, you've got options like going back into Pau, going to Guehi, going to Anderson. Those are nice, as I said. I think Guehi makes quite a bit of sense this week, just because he has a good fixture. But do you really want to spend that much money on Anderson, who I think is definitely overpriced at 4.9? Of course, Guehi's right there at 4.5. But do I also want to be owning Pau? If you, let's say, own cash, I definitely wouldn't be doubling up on the Aston Villa defense. That's just my personal opinion for the time being. So that's it for defenders. As far as the midfield this week, I think it's an interesting position where we have to be honest and say Bryan Mbeumo looks fantastic again. He's been playing forward and up top in the recent games. Of course, we know that there's a little bit of a sort of formational shift for this Brentford team when they play some of the tougher teams. And we do see from time to time them sort of playing Mbeumo up top with Wisa in those fixtures, as opposed to sort of when he goes out wide and effectively plays a right wing back role. Not only is that the case, but look, the simple reality is Bryan Mbeumo is a fantastic pick, and this Brentford team have actually been a very, very competent attack so far. So one thing I would like to point out is doesn't make sense to actually go back into Mbeumo this week. And actually, even though, right, Liverpool and Arsenal are fixtures around the corner for Mbeumo, I do think it makes sense because Mbeumo is that much better than some of the other picks in this price tier at 6.6, particularly after a price fall. When I even compare it to, let's say, Bowen, who I think a lot of people have been high on, but I've been actually rather low on, I wouldn't mind going out of Bowen this week into Mbeumo, because the way I see it is at least you trade up in the short term. You have a good fixture. It's West Ham at home versus, let's say, Bowen, who's actually playing Brentford away. And even though you miss maybe Bowen's next good fixture, which is game week 12, I do think Mbeumo is just an outright better asset than Bowen. And I'm happy to take the L in a few weeks' time when Bowen somehow has magically outscored him. But the thing with Mbeumo is I see him still as a season-long hold. I already regret going out of Mbeumo on my wild card. And yeah, for me, the way I see it, Game Week 11 is a nice like landing spot to go into Mbeumo. And then if I own Diaby, obviously Game Week 13 is a nice next landing spot. But reality, of course, is going to be that the next landing spot is Game Week 14 when Mbeumo has a perfect fixture. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about right now. I think Mbeumo is actually a good transfer to go back into if you're not too scared to do it. And if you've been frustrated, for example, with West Ham, I mean, even looking back towards Bowen's performance in the Aston Villa game, it wasn't great, right? It was just a deflected shot. Let's be honest about that. Could even be classified as an own goal. So that's it right now for someone like the midfield position and that sort of price point right now. I think it was very nice to see Adingra getting good minutes again in this Brighton team, because we expected Adingra to be a good differential last week and nothing has changed. So right now, I would say Adingra is also an asset that if you need to sort of cut down on your budget in that position, Adingra's position doesn't really seem to be too under threat. Of course, Buonanotte did actually come into the fixture and we're going to see a little bit more rotation from there. But I do think Adingra is still a good pick to sort of go with. Mitoma is probably someone that I wouldn't be transferring for Everton away, just because Everton, as I've been saying, they're a little bit underrated based on where they are in the league table, but they're actually quite a serious team. As much as we like to laugh, they actually got a clean sheet. I'm now one clean sheet down from Jordan Pickford after moving away from him, and I can only laugh at that sort of result. But I do think it's an interesting time to maybe jump on to Adingra if you actually need an enabler. Alternatively, this week, you could also just simply look towards Szoboszlai. Szoboszlai is a pick who, once again, we say doesn't have a necessarily high ceiling in FPL, but he can be a very consistent pick, and we saw it, for example, in the previous match versus Nottingham Forest. I've been saying actually Szoboszlai is a decent pick. I've also told people in the previous week to actually hold on to it, even though he's blanked. If you, let's say, want to have, let's say, another Liverpool asset and you're looking for someone at that price point, let's say you're moving out from Sterling this week, then obviously Szoboszlai is right there waiting for you. Outside of these sorts of picks, I really don't think there are any key transfers this week that we really need to focus on and hone in on. If you, let's say, own a Spurs pick right now, such as Maddison, super easy hold until maybe there's another avenue to jump back onto Saka, right? Because Saka has a great fixture in Game Week 12. That's probably another avenue where if you didn't go for that move where you went from Maddison or Son into Saka on Game Week 10, then obviously you can just do that move again in Game Week 12. But I would definitely not exercise that move on Game Week 11. It's not something that I would like to do. I would love to hold Maddison. I'd love to hold Son, just because Saka doesn't have a great fixture. It's Newcastle. It's very, very, very tough. So those are my thoughts there in the midfield. I think it's, once again, as I said, because of how we've invested, how we've sort of made our moves already in the previous weeks, there's no need to sort of push back and forth, especially if you've moved into Saka this week. I wouldn't regret it, and I wouldn't go straight back into Maddison, because simply the next fixture is going to be fantastic in Game Week 12 when he gets to face Burnley at home. So no complaints there, and that's a very good fixture where you should definitely be holding Saka in your team for. As far as the forwards this week, what I would say in this position is I think the one change is maybe Darwin Nunez, who's probably going to be elevated into that category on my cheat sheet, as a top tier pick. And as Solanke falls down because his fixtures are getting worse, and of course he already just played that Burnley fixture where he blanked in, you're now looking at maybe reconsidering, right, between the Brighton assets. Is there another forward to also consider on top of Darwin? These are sort of all your players who are in these positions who have very, very sort of arbitrary minutes at times with this Brighton team. What you can see is that Roberto De Zerbi in the press conference before the Fulham game basically says that Ansu Fati and João Pedro are his starting strikers in the most ideal formation. But who plays? Ferguson plays in the Fulham game because they simply cannot compete on European fixtures, EFL Cup fixtures, although they've actually got knocked out of the EFL Cup, so they'll get a full week of rest this week. So I actually think that João Pedro is actually a better punt than Ferguson, for example, because first of all, you have 1, penalties, and 2, Ferguson actually playing the previous fixture, which means that João Pedro should be in theory rested for the next game, which is going to be Everton. So owning João Pedro for that fixture seems to be quite nice in my opinion. But do you want to take that punt when Alvarez actually has really safe minutes himself? I probably wouldn't. I would be definitely transferring first in terms of priority Alvarez or Darwin, right? Because depending on, let's say, Luis Diaz's situation, and depending on how many minutes are played within the EFL Cup, I do think Darwin's actually a really nice pick and punt to go for. I would not overreact to, for example, Eddie Nketiah's hat-trick versus Sheffield United, which was very impressive, of course. And as I said, once again, shout out to Praz for going for him and Rich Clark. But you can't be just jumping onto Nketiah and reacting to form. The fixtures Newcastle doesn't really make too much logical sense to go into Nketiah, and we don't really know when Jesus is back. Arteta gave us the timeline that he'd be out for a few weeks. Maybe that's the international break, and he'll be back soon in game week 14. But maybe we can reconsider Nketiah seriously if we get some updates from Arteta this week after the Newcastle fixture. Wait for that, and then you can move into Nketiah in game week 12. So keep that in the back of your mind. Maybe if you hold your transfer now, you can actually go towards Eddie Nketiah on game week 12. So that's something to think about. However, as I said, the priority transfer this week, if you don't have a transfer or you're trying to upgrade away from Solanke, definitely going to be Alvarez, but also keep an open mind towards Darwin depending on what happens in terms of the fixtures between the EFL Cup for Liverpool, and in general also monitor Luis Diaz's situation, because of course, as unfortunate a situation as it is, it does seem to of course help all the Liverpool forwards, right? Between Jota, Gakpo and Darwin, and they all benefit from Luis Diaz being out of the team, because it just means that the minutes have to be shared between those 3 players for 2 positions. It's a lot harder when that position or those 2 positions are being shared by 4 players. So that's the only thing I would say right now. I think Darwin is definitely a key towards this Liverpool attack. He's definitely improved tremendously in terms of, let's say, how Jurgen Klopp perceives how he belongs in the team and the starting lineup. So this is probably the time to think about jumping onto Darwin. But I still think Luis Diaz is one of the players to sort of monitor in terms of his situation as well. If we're, let's say, saying that Darwin's going to be a 75-minute player going on from now on, I do think that Alvarez is still probably the pick that I would go with as a transfer this week. And that's just my personal opinion. But that just makes Darwin one of those players in the top echelon, right next to Watkins as well, who blanked versus Luton, but still had a good performance. And I wouldn't really be selling Watkins until maybe something like game week 13 potentially, or really game week 14, because game week 13 is so bad for all the players involved, really. It's a bad fixture for Watkins, it's a bad fixture for Alvarez, and it's a bad fixture definitely for Darwin. So I would definitely think about maybe switching around the forwards if you own, let's say, Watkins and you're in a 3-5-2 with Haaland on game week 14. But if you own, let's say, one of Watkins, Alvarez, or Darwin, I probably wouldn't touch anything. The question, of course, is whether you have the chance to upgrade. Now, if you're also looking at players at that sort of 5.x price point and you don't want to go to Nketiah this week because you really need someone to replace Solanke with, I suppose the one player that I would mention outside of João Pedro, if you don't want to go there for whatever reason, is going to be Cunha. Cunha is going to benefit definitely from Neto being out, but of course, keep in mind that Kalajic is also someone who comes in, and maybe Hwang, of course, is the one who benefits a little bit more from a minutes point of view with Neto being out. But of course, you just have to think about this Wolves team going on. They are not going to have the same amount of players to sort of fill in Neto's minutes. So everyone's going to benefit, in my opinion, is sort of the default sort of outcome that I would come out with. However, is there really a point towards stretching that sort of money towards Cunha? Probably not. I would rather actually just take the punt on João Pedro and just call it a day there, hoping that he plays versus Everton and hoping that he gets good minutes versus Sheffield United. It's a very hard science in terms of sort of predicting De Zerbi, and I don't think there's any reason other than the fact that sometimes he'll just have to rotate because he sees that his players need rest. And that's why both Ferguson and João Pedro are always at risk. But keeping them for a while probably means that you ensure you get some good hauls and some bad days as well, where unfortunately João Pedro doesn't get to play many minutes. And that's going to be my thoughts in terms of the positional transfers. In terms of captaincy this week, I think that there's not too much to say on captaincy. What I would mention is that it is definitely a 50-50 battle between Haaland and Salah. If you're a no Haalander, it's a very simple decision for you. It's just going to be a Salah captaincy because all the competing options like Saka, like Son, like usual, just have an awful fixture. Watkins himself has an away fixture, so there's no real debate towards the captaincy there. I think if you own Haaland and you own Salah, the question, of course, is going to be, do you want to sort of back Salah, who's been super consistent as of late, or Haaland, who, of course, seems like he re-emerged within the United game, and also not to mention the Champions League fixture, where he also scored a brace. What I would say is that Haaland has the home fixture. He doesn't have the midweek fixture, where he will probably be rested once again. And it's Bournemouth at home. Yes, of course, Luton Town are a much worse team than Bournemouth, I think, based on our expectations. But really, Bournemouth this season have been very shocking from the defensive point of view. And when we actually look at, for example, the underlying stats in the league as a whole, in terms of team expected goals conceded, then actually the reality is that Bournemouth have been worse than Luton Town, if anything. So the fact that Luton are at home, the fact that City are going to be at home, really just makes it quite easy for me to actually go for a Haaland captaincy. And ultimately, we're against if you're, let's say, owning Haaland, you're against all these no Haaland players. So this is the best week to own Haaland, to own twice of him, or even thrice if you really want to take that punt. I probably wouldn't. And just to enjoy this Bournemouth home fixture as it is. So I think for me, it's a Haaland captaincy. And then Salah, of course, if you're just forced to do so. But it's not a bad pick. It's definitely some sort of 55-45 in terms of Haaland's favor for me. The reality is Salah has been fantastic, and Luton are not a particularly great team on our estimations. And those are my thoughts for this week. So thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I will see you guys in the next video. And if you guys could smash the like button, that would be absolutely lovely, and subscribe, as I said. Take care, and see you guys next week.